Welcome to another episode of Our Story, where we connect our communities one story at a time. I'm your host, Edwin Hahn, and I'm very pleased to announce that we have Ulysses Jones back in the house. Now, we just had Ulysses on not too long ago, but we had a conversation, and he had some things on his heart that he just needed to get out and share with the light of recent events and things happening in the community. So we're going to give a warm welcome to Ulysses Jones. Welcome, Ulysses.
Thank you, Edwin. It's good to be back.
Absolutely. Thank you for taking time to be on Our Story. Well, just tell me a little bit more about what you've been experiencing lately, or what's been on your heart. I know we filled in a little bit about that you are a Tanakh scholar and a Hebrew teacher, and you also facilitate and host or teach these events called Scripture Circles. But for the sake of the community, maybe you could just share a little bit more about what you've been experiencing the last few days and why you want to come back on the show.
Yeah. First, thanks again for having me. Secondly, it's just you said the past few days, but I'm impressed in my heart that I've been noticing it for just a while, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. I've had numerous conversations with you and with other people that I know who've been pretty much saying that they've experienced the same thing, where in America, we're becoming very polarized. You're either for one side and to the death against the other side, or for another side and to the death against all who would oppose you. And just we're seeing more and more the effect that viewpoint, whether it's a political viewpoint or whether it's a religious viewpoint or whether it's a social viewpoint, just how that's tearing our nation apart, how it's killing young men in the streets, and it's causing others to riot and to just basically we stop listening to each other. And
yeah. So you're exactly, Ulysses, you touched on something that I think we all have been seeing, and maybe it's not quite it's not quite out because it's just been happening for so long that we just maybe have just become accustomed to it. But I think we're sensing a lot of division within this great country, and I think you're describing a lot of symptoms as far as not being willing to listen to each other, to hear each other, even though that opinion I might not agree with, or that belief I might not agree with, or position I might not agree with. But you mentioned something earlier that that the last time you were on that to listen to someone you don't agree with takes a lot of patience. And that's an attribute that you were very strongly speaking of, in favor of. So what are your thoughts on that, and where are you going with all of this? Go ahead, Ulysses.
By no means am I an expert on waiting or just listening to people who I don't agree with. It's something that I have to practice every single time, every single day, because what with the media and the news, there are just so many opinions floating out there, and so many people saying that, well, no, this is fact, or I believe this, and so everyone should treat it as truth. But it does take patience to be able to hear something that someone else doesn't agree with, or to even take it a step further and to listen to another idea that someone else who has voiced an opinion that you don't agree with in the past, to be able to listen and to say, well, the idea is great. I may not agree with this person all the time, but this particular idea works, or it's worthy of hearing, or just to see people as people and not as a series of opinions that you may or may not agree with.
So to see people as people, and maybe not as a political party, or as a particular minority group, or a particular class, or employer status even. So that's really interesting, because that's a big shift in the way that we think, to look beyond the titles and the perceptions and the images that we project out into the world, isn't it? So Ulysses, what what have you found? How can we kind of see behind the curtain when it comes to looking at each other as a fellow person and an individual as a fellow human being, and not a superficial image that we project?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is, of course, the golden rule. But in today's day and time, you have people, well, let's take the golden rule a step further. What happens if you do treat people the way that you want to be treated, but they may not return, they may not feel that they have to treat you the way that they would want to be treated? Well, what do you do then? And well, the textbook answer is, of course, to still treat people the way that you would want to be treated. I mean, that philosophers would argue that's the true measure of one's integrity, whether or not you do what's right, regardless of the consequences. But to speak to today's time and what's going on, I think, well, again, I'll go back to patience, but also as well to be able to still see the person as a person who may not be acting in their best through their best nature, so to speak, and to realize that we ourselves do that sometimes. And yeah, just to extend grace the way you would want grace to be extended to you. Like if you wronged someone, you would want them to be patient with you until you reach the point where you realized, oh, wait a second, I really messed up.
Well, what about this? What about the concept or the belief, the idea of justice? If there's been a wrong, shouldn't it be made right? Shouldn't there be some consequences to, some really poor behavior or destructive behavior or oppressive behavior? What are your thoughts on that? Shouldn't justice be held?
Another good question. For one, as a believer that there is a God and he is a great proponent of justice, I believe that it's one of those things when we give it to God, justice is inevitable. That's not to say that we don't have a part here on earth to play, that we aren't actors here, and that we do have to treat people well, but we also have to stand up when there's a wrong and there's a time for change. So yeah,
it's an interesting tension to hold, the balancing act between what we might call justice and grace, and it's phenomenal wisdom. It's time, centuries, the millennia wisdom of to treat our neighbor as we would want to be treated. So that's thank you for that. That's a great reminder of how we could possibly show grace or act in a way that's palatable when people we have conflict with each other. So I want to ask you this, Ulysses, with all the rioting going on, right? There's a lot of rioting, destruction. The people who are up the forefront of that movement, they believe that there is a just cause that they are fighting for, and they believe that it seems like, anyway, they believe that they are doing good. And so I just want to get your take on that, as far as what do you think, either from your own life experience, how the writers, how the people who are destroying and really putting making a statement in a violent way. What is your take on all of that from your own experience?
it's interesting. Just realizing that people whose skin color is darker just by reason of that, or people who are poorer or just in some way different than what establishment would say is the best, and realizing that prejudice does exist and that there are people who do judge and treat people as less than people based upon their appearance. And yes, it has happened to myself and I've seen it happen to others. I I don't like it. And I do believe that there needs to be a change. And I do believe that there is difficulty in affecting change because not everyone wants to. I mean, if you're at the top of the food chain, so to speak, well, why change that? But um, another proponent of change is that things don't happen overnight and that it takes not just concerted effort, but concerted effort over time, which means rather than becoming more divisive over time, a movement needs to become stronger and to gain more and more proponents, more and more people, and to have more and more voices brought into the conversation, even if those voices don't always say the same thing that you agree with. And that's something that I would advocate rather than striking the person in front of you or trying to harm them because they don't agree with you. Rather, try to inform them or bring them into the conversation, or I don't know, just you'd be surprised how willing people are to talk. Not all, but a lot.
Yes, and we seem to have moved away from really being patient in dialogue with just sitting back and being keyboard commandos and blasting people on social media when we don't agree with them, rather than tolerating the the difference of opinion. But you mentioned something very interesting, and that's the striking of our neighbor, like the physical violence against a fellow man, and how that is force. And it reminds me of this thought that we can't kill an ideology with a bullet. We can't force people to change their belief systems. And the idea, and it's just kind of thinking along these lines of how does violent destruction ultimately influence the way a person thinks in a beneficial way. So it's also the concept that force is an attempt to control, and really control is a form of oppression. So isn't that really oppression when we're forcing and violent behavior? It's a question. What do you think, Ulysses?
It's interesting. If by forcing your opinion on someone the way they force their opinion on you, in some people's minds, those are the only two options that are available. Either he's going to win and I'm going to serve him, or I'm going to win and I can make sure myself and my constituents or my proponents or people like me are going to be able to win and to survive. And so it's interesting, this conversation that we're having, that proposing there's a third way. And if both of you work together rather than trying to have a winner and a loser, trying to create win-win situations. And I think at the end of the day that that results in a higher quality of life and happiness for both sides, and both are then invested in maintaining that sort of happy state.
Right. So what I'm hearing is that maybe the path forward is through dialogue. It might take a lot of work and a lot of effort, but to have a conversations that are very difficult, and be patient and listening, even though you might not agree, and you may not change your mind. You may not, your opinion may not, or your belief may not be swayed, but to give that space maybe for someone to be heard and to actually genuinely listen. That sounds like what I'm hearing from you as far as your perspective moving forward.
Right. And I like what you said about having the difficult conversations and confronting long held beliefs. A lot of people, their beliefs are very sacred, and just even the discussion of them is painful or brings the fear that, oh no, everything I am, everything I stand for, my identity is going to be undermined simply by the fact that we're talking about it. And that's, I don't know, society at this point needs to, we need to grow a little to be able to discuss the things that are very important to us, and to be able to do so in such a way that, one, we don't cut down people in front of us, but also, two, that we make ourselves known, and to be able to learn how to do that with with people. It's like you said, it's going to take time. And right now, well, right now we may be just in a season of planting seeds. So seeds, as you know, don't trees don't grow up overnight, and they don't certainly don't bring forth fruit. Sometimes even the first or the second or even the third year. And even if they do bring forth fruit, they have to be watered, they have to be fertilized. The sun has to get to them, and you can't make a tree grow. You can help it grow faster, but you can't force it. You can't make it grow. So you can
Well,
only cultivate the type of environment where it can grow and it can flourish, and trust that it will happen.
hmm. So it goes back to what you were saying before about being patient. There's a position where I think a lot of people, or a lot of these people have taken, that are leading protests, and not necessarily the protests, but the rioting and the looting, that um, they don't. They're the time for waiting's over. That we've waited uh, several hundred years to see something change, and it hasn't happened. So how would you respond to that position, or that thought that um, we've been patient enough?
I say that, yeah, in a perfect world, you've been more than patient. You've, yeah, endured wrong for a very long time. That's usually the case with wrong, especially with institutionalized wrong. It's, it doesn't change overnight. I mean, we live in America where taxation without representation was a big deal. And even though the founding fathers believed that they had waited a very long time, it still took a long, long time, years of conflict before anything was able to change. And then after that, it took years and years and years to set the groundwork, lay the groundwork of this nation. So if it's worth doing, it's worth investing the time and the effort rather than looking for the shortcuts and the quick answers. It's worth having those hard conversations with people you don't agree with, and sitting down and repeatedly, if necessary, making your feelings known and pointing out the wrong that's been done to you. And yeah, it's worth wrestling with, is what I'm saying.
Hmm. And maybe the thought that true freedom comes from a lack of force, you might say. That uh, if we can recognize oppression as an attempt to control, and we use force to control, that we wouldn't want to, if we truly want to be free, we want to truly break oppression, that perhaps we wouldn't use force. Yeah, it's a thought. Anyway.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate the comments, Ulysses, and the wonderful insight, especially when it comes to planting a seed, and being able to be patient and not control it to grow. We're not able to control how quickly a seed bursts out of the ground, as far as I know right now. But in any event, it's wonderful wisdom there. And I just want to give you an opportunity. We've kind of gone a little bit over our time here, but just want to give you an opportunity to wrap it up, Ulysses, as far as the one thing that you want to tell the community right now. If you want to summarize it, if there's something deep on your heart that you want to emphasize out there, go ahead.
Yeah, just patience and waiting just by no means doesn't mean rolling over or doing anything. Rather, the solutions we seek should be long-term solutions rather than ones that are short-term, where we give vent to our emotions. And yes, it feels good in the moment, but later, what's going to happen? Is anybody going to be even willing to listen to us after this if all we're able to do is gain short-term goals and not seek allies, or try to work with others, or try to bring better understanding, shed more light onto the situation? So yeah, that's just my free advice. It's worth whatever you pay for it. So
Well, thank you, Ulysses, for your very, very valuable advice and for sharing from your heart your story as a part of our story and for challenging the listeners out there and the viewers out there to sow some seeds and be patient as the trees grow. Thank you, Ulysses. Ladies and gentlemen, Ulysses Jones. Once again, we appreciate your time, Ulysses. Thank you.
Thank you, Edwin.
If you enjoyed this content, go ahead and click the like button and subscribe. Again, my name is Edwin Hahn. I'm your host. If you'd like to be on the show, we certainly invite you in. You can send us an email at edwinforhouse@gmail.com. That's edwinforhouse@gmail.com. We'd love to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful day.